Deep in the heart of Irish mythology, there exists a figure so terrifying, so haunting, that its mere name can send a chill down your spine: the Dullahan. Known as the Headless Rider, this ghostly figure is a harbinger of death. If you hear the thunder of hooves in the dead of night and catch a glimpse of a black horse with fiery eyes, beware. You may have crossed paths with the Dullahan. The Dullahan is often depicted riding a massive black stallion, his head in hand, eyes glowing with malevolent energy. His severed head is said to have a grin that stretches from ear to ear, and wherever the Dullahan rides, death is not far behind. In Irish lore, he is believed to be a dark fairy or even a soul sent from the other world. When the Dullahan calls out the name of a person, that person is doomed to die, and no force on earth can prevent their fate. What makes the Dullahan even more terrifying is that he cannot be stopped or appeased. Unlike other mythological beings, there is no bargaining with this headless horseman. If you encounter him, your only hope is that his gaze passes over you, and that it is not your name he speaks in the darkness. In his hands, he carries a whip made from the spine of a human corpse, which he cracks like thunder, sealing the fate of his chosen victims. Tonight, we explore the horrifying legend of the Dullahan, taking you deep into the cold, misty night of Ireland, where one man has an encounter he will never forget. So sit back, relax if you can, and remember to close your windows. The Dullahan may be closer than you think. Now listen to this terrifying story of Jack MacDermott. Jack MacDermott was a man who prided himself on his rational mind. A farmer by trade, he lived alone on the outskirts of the village of Kilmullen, a place isolated from the world, where the roads were little more than dirt paths cutting through the wild, untamed landscape of rural Ireland. Jack had heard the old legends of the Dullahan. Who hadn't? Every child in the village grew up with tales of the Headless Rider, the cursed harbinger of death. But to him, they were nothing more than stories meant to frighten children and keep them in their beds at night. But even Jack couldn't deny the strange happenings that had begun around Kilmullen in the weeks leading up to that fateful night. The air had grown thick with an unnatural chill, even though it was the middle of summer. Cows were found dead in the fields, their bodies drained of blood, their eyes wide open in terror. Locals spoke in hushed voices of strange figures seen riding across the moors after sunset, and of hearing the distant sound of hoofbeats as if a phantom rider was galloping through the misty hills. Jack brushed it all off, convinced that it was nothing more than local superstition. He had lived through many seasons and seen his fair share of odd occurrences, but they always had an explanation: wolves, sickness, or simply the wild imagination of a fearful village. But one night, as he sat by the fire in his modest cottage, something happened that he could not explain away so easily. It was a dark, moonless night. The wind howled through the trees, bending the branches as if they were made of paper. Jack sat by the fire, sipping from a cup of whiskey, trying to shake off the strange sense of unease that had settled over him. Outside, the countryside was silent, the kind of silence that presses down on you, heavy and suffocating. Suddenly he heard it, the distant sound of hoofbeats. They started faint, barely noticeable over the wind, but they grew louder with every passing second. Thump, thump, thump. The rhythm was steady, deliberate, and it was coming closer. Jack set his cup down, his heart pounding in his chest. He moved to the window, peering out into the darkness, but saw nothing. Still, the hoofbeats continued, growing louder and louder, until it felt like the rider was right outside his door. And then they stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The fire crackled weakly in the hearth, and Jack held his breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. That's when he heard the whisper: Jack MacDermott. It was a voice unlike any he had ever heard before, low, raspy, and full of malice. His blood ran cold as the name echoed through his cottage. The voice had come from outside, but there was no one there. His hands trembled as he grabbed the lantern from the table and flung open the door. The night was pitch black, with only the faint light of the lantern illuminating the path ahead. But as Jack stepped outside, he saw something that made his heart stop. Standing in the middle of the road was a massive black horse, its eyes glowing like embers, and atop it sat the figure of the Dullahan, the Headless Rider. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the creature before him. The Dullahan was even more terrifying than the stories had described. His body was cloaked in dark armor that seemed to absorb the light, and in one hand, he held his severed head. The head's skin was pale and sickly, and its mouth was twisted into a grotesque grin. The eyes glowed with a fiery intensity that cut through the darkness like a blade. The Dullahan raised his other hand, and in it he held a whip. No, not a whip, but a long, twisted spine, its bones rattling as it cracked in the air. "Jack MacDermott," the head spoke again, its voice full of doom. Jack took a step back, his mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. The Dullahan wasn't real. He couldn't be real. But here he was, flesh and bone, or whatever it was that made up this nightmare. The horse snorted, pawing at the ground, and the air grew colder still. It felt as though the very life was being sucked out of the night. "Your time has come," the head whispered. Jack wanted to run, to flee into the safety of his home, but his legs refused to move. He was frozen, trapped by the gaze of the Dullahan's head. The rider began to move, guiding his horse forward, slow and deliberate. Every step sent a shiver down Jack's spine, the sound of the hooves pounding in his skull like a death knell. And then the whip cracked. It sliced through the air like lightning, and in that moment Jack felt something, an invisible force, wrap around his throat. He gasped, his hands flying to his neck, but there was nothing there. Still, the pressure grew, tightening, squeezing the breath from his lungs. He fell to his knees, his vision blurring as the world around him darkened. The Dullahan had claimed him. As Jack collapsed onto the cold, hard ground, gasping for air, the Dullahan stopped his advance. The headless rider loomed over him, his severed head grinning in triumph. But just as Jack felt his life slipping away, something unexpected happened. From the darkness of the night came a blinding flash of light, so bright and pure that it cut through the shadows like the rising sun. The Dullahan reared back, his horse screaming in pain as the light enveloped them. For the first time, Jack saw fear in the rider's eyes, or at least in the eyes of the head he carried. A figure stepped out of the light, a woman clothed in white, her face serene but stern. She raised her hand and the Dullahan screamed, his body twisting and writhing as if in agony. The whip fell from his grasp, and the force around Jack's throat vanished. "Begone, spirit of death," the woman commanded, her voice soft but unyielding. The Dullahan let out a final, terrible shriek before dissolving into the night, vanishing as quickly as he had come. The horse bolted, disappearing into the mist, and the air grew still once more. The woman turned to Jack, who lay on the ground, trembling and gasping for breath. "You have been given a second chance," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "But the Dullahan will return one day. Be sure you are ready when he does." With that, she faded into the night, leaving Jack alone beneath the cold stars. Jack never spoke of his encounter with the Dullahan, but from that night onward, he was a changed man. He no longer dismissed the old legends as mere superstition, and he lived each day with a new respect for the forces he had once mocked. The village of Kilmullen remained quiet in the weeks that followed. No more cows were found dead, and the strange happenings that had plagued the area seemed to vanish with the Dullahan. But Jack knew that it was only a matter of time before the headless rider returned, and when he did, there would be no light to save him. If you enjoyed this terrifying tale of the Dullahan, the Headless Horseman of Irish mythology, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more spine-chilling stories. Let us know in the comments if you've ever heard of the Dullahan or other terrifying Irish legends, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another haunting tale. Thanks for watching, and remember, if you hear hoofbeats in the dead of night, it may already be too late.